Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome everyone into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Everyone, how you doing? Welcome into the program. So today on the show, in the second part of the show, we will have computer and technology news, which is just keeping you up to date on all things technology related, be that policy, be that new products, be that just general fun news. It's always a fun time, and it's good to stay up to date and be able to keep track of that kind of thing. So really looking forward to that. In the first part of the show, though, you can look forward to our guest today. He is none other than Mr. Albert Cory, and of course he wrote the book Inventing the Future. And if you haven't heard about this, everything with Apple, Microsoft, Xerox engineers, all that, hey, this was a tumultuous time in the tech industry, and a lot of firsthand accounts and a great book. Of course, there he's waving to us off in the wings, and we'll bring him on in just a moment. So everyone, sit back and relax. Before we get started, though, computeramerica.com. That's where you'll find everything, including past shows, future shows. If you can't listen to us live on IRN, then you can, of course, find the podcast feed there as well. After the show, we'll have that up and running. You can see the video portion where you can see myself. We'll show off the book, and of course, that's a little bit more helpful for when we have like drone companies or stuff like that on. We can do demonstrations, but hey, if you want to watch the video, see my face and of course our guest face, then you can certainly do that as well. Now, all that being said, we're hoping that everything works here behind the scenes, because I did exactly zero prep work, so this is going to go great. Everyone, welcome onto the program. We have Mr. Albert Cory, and again, author at Cubby Bear Press, and of course, the book Inventing the Future. Albert, thank you so much for joining us. How you doing? Our pleasure. Let's see. I think it was let's see. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, it definitely did get switched around. Okay, so now everyone, you can see him there on the screen. You can see myself on the screen. We're good to go. You can of course see the book there. How you doing? How you doing?
Oh. Thanks for having me on. I'm all set to tell everybody about my book, and I hope you like it. And if you want to hear stories about the old days, back in the day, just let me know.
Absolutely.
I didn't know everybody.
Yeah.
We're actually never met. Go ahead.
And I was just going to say that we're definitely going to get into your backstory and how you were related to all this as well. And, this is a part that was a little bit before my time, although I mentioned it to Craig, and he instantly said, oh, yeah, that was a crazy time with Apple and Xerox and all that stuff. So this is going to be enlightening for me, but for a lot of people out there, this is your first time hearing about it. I'm sure, Albert, that you are not going to assume any knowledge on, kind of what happened, and we'll cover it from the beginning. So before we get to that, though, why don't we get some backstory on yourself? What is your story, and how do you fit in all this?
I was hired at Xerox in 1976, the very end of 76, when Star which was what it was called then. Actually, it wasn't called that. It was called Display Word Processor.
Okay.
two names before Star. Was just getting started. So I graduated from the University of Illinois in 1972. And I got my got my master's a little bit later, and I worked at Burroughs, believe it or not. I lived in Detroit, although I don't like to talk about that. It was as bad then as it is now.
I refuse to make fun of Detroit because I had a guest on the program that he was with a car company, and I said, at least at least you're not in Detroit. And he immediately said, I was actually born in Detroit. It's my home city. And I'm like, whoops, okay. So personally, no more of making fun of Detroit, but I get you. So you did a stint down there. Or up there.
I did a stint just for 9 months. We were going to move to Irvine, California, which we eventually did. Mm-hmm. And then I worked at Xerox, and it was just getting started. Most people don't know that El Segundo, which is near LAX, mm-hmm. was where Star was built. It was inspired in Palo Alto, and we came up all the time, which is in my book. But the Star product was built in El Segundo for the most part. And it was buildings that were used originally for Xerox Data Systems, which was a time-sharing company that Xerox bought in 1969 and ran into the ground and sold in 1975. But they kept some of the people around to work on their office automation thing. And those are the people that hired me. Mm-hmm. So we started, and they had the Mesa language, which people probably haven't heard much about, but it's sort of like Pascal, which maybe you also haven't heard about, but it used to be a big thing.
Right.
We had Ethernet, which was 3 megabits at the time, and I talk about
Super
that
fast.
Quite a bit. Well, at the time, you would buy a T1 line for thousands of dollars per month from mm-hmm. the phone system. So 3 megabits for a local network was pretty amazing. And they were planning to make it 20. Eventually, they settled for 10. And we had a bitmap screen with a mouse, which no one had ever seen before. And you can see that on the cover of my book if you look closely. There you go. You're on it there. So that's the Alto. I have in the back of the book, I have the real photo this was based on.
Right.
But the Alto was about the size of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And the person who's using it there is playing a game called Maze War, which
Maze War.
You can mm-hmm. look up that on Wikipedia.
1974. There you go.
Yeah.
I've definitely played that one. Yeah, with the green walls and well, obviously everything was green, but yeah, with the walls you kind of turn left and yeah, absolutely.
So that comes later in the book about. I think it was around earlier, but I started using it in 79. Mm-hmm. So it was a massively multiplayer game long before anybody knew what those were. At the time, Pong was not quite the state of the art, but almost. So we worked on Star for a long time, and a lot of designing the hardware, and we're not selling the Alto that you see there. Right. By the way, there's a story here about that. This is a real Alto, and I took this picture last November. There's a guy in Seattle that restores the old computers, and he has 2 Altos in his basement. And the guy here on the left, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. I was saying that I'm surprised that I don't know too much about the technology, kind of back then. Like, I would assume that a lot of it, like, I'm sure museums are still looking for this kind of equipment because to a lot of people, and especially like the earlier mass-produced and, to whatever extent mass-produced meant back then, a lot of it was just kind of used. And then obviously technology being technology, we come across this a lot on the show where people would just throw away stuff and, actually kind of categorizing, especially software, certain pieces of hardware. It's pretty hard to get your hands on, and I guess kind of preserve it for future generations.
It's very hard. And I'm giving a talk at the Vintage Computer Festival in August, and I'm hoping to use some video of a recent Xerox Alto restoration, which I could have gone to, but I'm not really a hardware guy. So it's hard to get all these parts, but especially with the internet now, it's probably easier than 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So the guy on the screen, which you can see on the left there.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead. This is the son, Jeffrey Smith, of Dave Smith, who you probably don't know that name either, but Dave is the guy who invented icons, believe it or not.
And it's actually quite funny, because I've been looking to get a lot of these, gentlemen here, ladies and gentlemen here on the show, because I think some people don't realize that a lot of the, kind of the original creators of technology, the creator of the mouse, the creator of, the internet, the creator, like all you guys are, all of you guys are still just kind of going around writing books, doing talks, you're all still here. And that's always a lot of fun to see. Like, before computers is not that long ago. And I know you keep saying, if you recall, don't take my general knowledge for kind of what the audience has, because I know that I'm kind of young, and especially for, Computer America has been around since 1992. So there's been a lot of people, I'm sure, that are, you're dropping these names and they're not hitting me, but I guarantee you there's people out there that are like, really? So please.
Well, Dave Smith, I'm sure would love to come on your show. In fact, I'll talk to him after this is over. So he invented icons as part of his doctoral work at Stanford. And his son there, who's now older than Dave was at the time, his son's, I think, 42. Mm-hmm. He lives in Portland. And I got him to come up to Seattle to use this alto. And the story about him was when Dave's wife was pregnant in 1980, I think, she was overdue. The baby wouldn't come out, and they went to park to kill some time, and they saw Maze War. And the shock of seeing this bloody veined eyeball, mm-hmm. he says he credits her with putting her into labor, and she gave birth to Jeff here, who you see on the screen.
There you go. It's from beginning to now. It's really I'm surprised that an eyeball, back then, but obviously with the graphics we have nowadays, it kind of pales in comparison. But still, how was it dealing with these systems? And you've already mentioned the Star, the Alto, all this kind of thing. When you were designing these were for, you mentioned like workplace automation. If you could, kind of take us back a little bit to, what was Xerox's, real purpose with these systems? Because when I think Xerox, I of course think, like the scanning and that whole thing. I never really considered Xerox to be a player in the kind of personal computer, but obviously this is what leapfrogs us into Apple.
Well, neither did anyone else.
Yes. There you go. So yeah, talk about kind of early Xerox and, kind of how personalities, kind of came and started, developing the story.
Sure. Well, Dave actually wrote the foreword to my book, but I'll go over some of this. So Xerox mm-hmm. had become like a verb, lowercase x. I'm going to go Xerox this. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, they had an exclusive on copiers, which made them an immensely profitable company. And then in the mid 70s, the patents started expiring, and Japanese companies started making copiers, and IBM made copiers. And they thought, well, we have to do something to stay alive, or else they're going to take our business away. So they started a research center in Palo Alto to basically bring us into the future. And they hired a lot of computer science PhDs, including one guy, Bob Taylor, who's no longer with us. Mm-hmm. Actually, I worked with his son at 3Com, but that's another story. So they had a lot of PhDs, and they created essentially the computer world we live in today. That they didn't invent the mouse. That was Doug Engelbart,
right?
Who's also not with us anymore. But they figured out how to use it on a computer application. So when I joined, they had some programs like Markup and Draw to do graphics. Mm-hmm. And they had a program, Bravo, this first WYSIWYG for what you see is what you get text editor. Actually, Bravo wasn't WYSIWYG unless you put it in that mode, and most of us didn't, but they like to say it's WYSIWYG.
Right.
So Charles Simone Do you know that name at all?
Charles Simone. No, I do not.
Okay, so Charles, he used to be the boyfriend of Martha Stewart. This was long after Xerox. He went into space on the Russian Soyuz back in the 90s, I think. So he joined Microsoft in about 1980.
And he built the first Office suite, I believe.
He built the first Microsoft Word.
Yeah.
Which I'm in touch with Charles. I don't usually say that this person in the book is really this person. My book is fiction, but when there's a guy named Karol Molnar, which is Hungarian name, and Charles is famously Hungarian, you kind of know that must be him. So I did work for Charles for about 4 months, and I liked him a lot, actually. Cool. After Bravo, he did a lot of things that made him kind of unpopular at Park, which I thought was unfair. He didn't like Mesa at all, and he told me that he and Bill Gates agreed that Word would be built in C, which everybody at Xerox made fun of. There's I don't shy away from. I don't have any hindsight in the book. No one's allowed to know anything that they wouldn't have known then.
Well, yeah, and sorry to kind of cut you off there, but we can take just one little step back about the book and kind of give people an idea of the timeline. I think that'd be very helpful. Talk about what years this book covers, and then we'll start talking about kind of why fictitious people and why but obviously there's going to be real events, and this is you, as I understand it, you really tried to put through personal experience, your own interviews that you did with the people that were there, you tried to put together as best as the events could have occurred over the period of time. That's kind of my understanding. But let's take one little step back, talk about the time period, the years that the book covers, and then again, why, how you kind of went about writing the book, being this narrative.
Yeah, that's a great questions. Everybody's going to wonder that. So there's already a couple nonfiction books about this period. There's one called Dealers of Lightning, which actually I have it right here.
Dealers of Lightning. Yep, there you go.
So this is a really good book. It's nonfiction, and the author Michael Hiltzik has my book right now. Actually, I haven't talked to him about how he likes it, but so there's already history books, and what I wanted to do was to show the subjective experience of what it was actually like to be part of the revolution and to not know how it's going to end. Because when you write a history, generally they talk to the big players, the Steve Jobs, well, Jobs is dead, but
right.
Larry Tesler's dead, but you talk to those people, and Chuck Thacker, who, sorry, he's also gone. Not everybody's dead, but those three people are. So, and the ordinary people down in the trenches like me are never talked with and if I did try to write a real history with those people, then the first problem I would have is nobody remembers anything. Some people barely remember they were there, let alone what they said on some given day.
Not enough memory. That was a problem back then. Yeah. Yeah.
Things weren't. Actually, a lot of the documents from back then are on BitSavers, and I referred to them constantly. It's Al Casso, I think, at the Computer History Museum that we have to thank for that. So what I wanted to show is what it's actually like to be in this profession, which you're not going to get from a history because those just talk to the big players, and I'm talking to somebody more like you and me.
Right.
Not to put you down.
Well, no, not at all. And I am not part of like the computer science, kind of research and development. I definitely talk to plenty of product managers and, kind of C-level C-level people like that. When I do get the chance to talk to actual researchers and developers that are doing this kind of thing, they're always very passionate. And I definitely appreciate that. I love having passionate people here on the show. But I got to say that interviewing them and then hearing other people outside the industry, and what they think about the industry. They think that everything is driven by product. Everything is driven by product managers. Everything is a bottom line. They think there's a clear end goal. If something wasn't done or done correctly, it was because someone was either stingy with the pocket money, or or they, there was some kind of thing like that. How far away or how relatable is that when it comes to actually researching this stuff? Because I can't imagine that there's any one person that really makes that kind of call, or there aren't that many pivotal moments that are like, here's where everything went south,
Yeah, I hear you. If you're a journalist, like nowadays, if you read Forbes and they talk about GE or General Motors or something, it's always, it's Jack Welch that did it, or it's Mary Barra that did it.
Right.
And that works for them because they've got a deadline and they have to turn in 5,000 words about GM. But the reality that I was trying to get at is it's much more of a group of people who collectively don't know what they're doing and are sometimes afraid of people in the other end of the country that they've never met. Or I have one chapter that I wrote particularly. Oh, getting back a second, you asked about what time period, and
yes,
the time
please.
period is I started there on December 26, 1976. Mm-hmm. I wanted to start in 76 because I'd had a job and I knew that gave me 1 year more seniority as far as vacation went. So that there wasn't really much happening that week, but and it ends a few months after we introduced Star at the National Computer Conference in May of '81. So another anecdote about that, by the way, is everybody's heard about Steve Jobs visiting Xerox, and I do talk about that. Mm-hmm. Now, that was December '79, okay, and the Star, if you're doing the math here, the Star came out like 16 months later. And if you think that it was all demoable and nice when he was there, you haven't been around software very much.
Yeah.
Because it was barely getting started. So what Jobs saw was the Alto that you see on the cover there of my book, and a system called Smalltalk, which maybe you've heard of. Yeah, there's the Alto.
Smalltalk, right?
Smalltalk was an object-oriented system, which we talk about that some in the book. We didn't use it. It was considered too slow, but it was a vehicle for exploring object-oriented programming. And Jobs has actually been interviewed about this. He said, I was at Park and I saw local area networks, and that didn't make much of an impression on me. And then I saw object-oriented programming, and that didn't make much of an impression. And then they showed me this user interface, and I just flipped out. I wonder, why isn't Xerox doing anything with this? And the fact is, we were doing something with it, but he didn't see that. Mm. What I since found out that I didn't even know, although I was there, was at the National Computer Conference in May of '81. Jobs was coming to all of our demos. Yeah. So I guess I saw him. I'm not sure I even knew what he looked like then. But and the booth was really crowded, which to be honest, that was like one of the highlights of my career, is that show, because I've been doing it for so many years and the world just went nuts over it. We had a demo every hour, and people were arriving 10 minutes before the hour to be sure they got a good place to stand. And they were overflowing into the IBM booth, which made IBM complain. So Jobs came to all these demos, which I never realized, but Dave Liddell, who was our chief, told me this. So I kind of suspect he's right. Jobs is gone, so we can't ask him. And I forget what your original questions were, or if I answered them or not.
And they had to do with the time period. So, like you said, 76, and the book goes all the way until the events of when did you find, I guess, kind of in your story, a good kind of wrap up, or is it just one of those kind of open-ended kind of stories?
Okay, so the wrap up, there's three main characters. Okay, one of them is Dan, who I say in the book is me, basically, and nothing happens to Dan that didn't happen to me. The other two really are fictional. Janet Saunders, who doesn't correspond to anybody at Xerox. So I had to put her into a job where she didn't do too much damage to the story. So she's not based on the guy who actually had that job. So after the NCC, National Computer Conference, everybody started realizing, we really got something here. And holy cow, Xerox doesn't understand it at all. They don't know what to do. And there was this torrent of emails about we should do this and we should do that. And Xerox executives, of course, weren't used to this kind of thing. They expect everybody to salute and follow orders. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the book, I guess I can give away the plot because it's all history. Janet also goes to the NCC with me. And she decides to join the Apple Lisa project. Mm-hmm. So Lisa is what came before the Macintosh. And it was kind of a failure. It sold for $10,000. And you can find them, actually. There's a Facebook group devoted to the Lisa. And there's people who buy these things and restore them. And I'm not sure why, but it's got a fan club.
And I'm sure that a lot of people out there, kind of growing up and being there during this time with, the Apple Lisa or any of these old pieces of hardware. I mean, I see it all the time with. I'm more in like the video games, like old video game consoles that, it's like, hey, why would you play that old console versus some of the newer, kind of obviously superior stuff? But hey, nostalgia, it hits hard, and they are kind of touchstones to history. So I actually do get it. That makes a lot of sense. They are
actually. My second book, which I'm actually almost done with, is set in the 80s, and I was really tempted for a while to make it more about video games.
Yeah.
But I didn't really work on those then. I knew people who did, mm-hmm. and it kind of felt false to make a whole big story out of video games when I wasn't in that industry.
Right.
Yeah, it's just touched on that.
Yeah. But of course, your knowledge is, again, something that a lot of people would not have in, like you said, these other history books or things like that. Let's touch on real quick, how you mentioned that there is the character that is you, but of course is, has a different name, and you inserted a couple of other characters that weren't really there, but like you said, they kind of pulled on different jobs that people were actually doing, based on real events. This person did that, whatever. And obviously you have, the Hungarian gentleman who is a direct reference. Why? So you mentioned that you did not want just a straight historical, kind of point, because like you said, some people are impossible to get a hold of, and that's already kind of been covered. What do you think making it a kind of a historical narrative and putting these characters in, what do you think that adds to the story? Is it, does it make these, instead of just, this event happened in 1976, 1981, like, do you think it actually makes the reader, kind of put themselves there and understand the process to which events happen? Because it's one thing to know events. It's another thing to understand why the events happened the way they did.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And to be honest, there's a couple people that I've given the book to who didn't like it. Mm-hmm. And of course, anytime you create something, you can't please everyone.
Right.
Some people say, oh, I really want a cheat sheet of who all these people are. And I say, well, Mark Twain, I should have had this quote ready. He was talking about Tom Sawyer, and he said that all the characters in Tom Sawyer were composites of children that he knew, and all the events sort of happened. And by now, you don't really care who the real Tom Sawyer was or who the real Becky Thatcher was. The other reference, which is really important for me, is the Patrick O'Brien books. Hold on a second, I'll get one.
Yeah, sure, one thing. And by the way, everyone, the quote I believe he is talking about is, let's see, Mark Twain, Tom Sawyer, the three boys whom I knew and therefore belongs to the composite order of architecture. There you go.
So there was
Patrick O'Brien.
The movie Master and Commander, mm-hmm. About the Napoleonic Wars. And the character is Jack Aubrey, who was Russell Crowe, and Stephen Maturin, who mm-hmm. was Paul Bettany. There's some thought that they really existed, that there was some sea captain that Jack Aubrey was based on. But at this point, who cares? what does that? What does that add to your knowledge to know that there was really a Jack Aubrey, unless you're really, really into Napoleonic War history? So that was sort of what I wanted to do. I wanted to write fiction, and I
more
found
relatable. Yeah,
it's more relatable, and also, I think I said this in this interview with Authority magazine, which just came out today, actually. That I'd never heard of Authority, but my publicist has, fortunately. So, a young person who's thinking, what career should I go into? Like I actually did. They tend to think, oh, well, marketing is more creative, or fashion design is more creative, and they don't really have an idea what it's like to actually do that job. And you really can't get.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Are we still here?
No,
you really can't get.
Yeah.
Let me know if we have to cut off or something.
No. I was actually looking for the interview that you mentioned so I could link it in the in the show notes. But of course, my computer made atrocious sound. So please go ahead.
Okay, I'll send it to you afterwards.
Perfect.
What was I saying? So you can't really get an idea what it's like to do that job by reading books or even interviews. You have to sort of put yourself in that world. So I quote in my preface the French writer Albert Camus, who said, "Fiction is the lie by which we tell the truth." So that's what I look at. You can read history books if you want, and there's a couple good ones, or you can try to get inside this world, which maybe you like, maybe you don't like, but
well, yeah, and obviously for as we kind of turn a generation here, I mean, these are stories that I personally, I'm sure that if I had gone further into my studies of going into computer science, I would have touched on these at some point. But even in just doing the show for the past 12 years, it hasn't really come up. We've had a number of people on the show, but this kind of history. This is, hey, it's something that some people may not have touched on. And if you did live through it, it's been a couple of years since you thought, oh, wow, remember that. So let's, it seems like a big part of the story is this part where Steve Jobs was attending all the different demonstrations that you were giving, with Xerox and Park. So how did that story go different than everyone remembers? Because this seems to be reported on a lot. There's been a lot of biographies that kind of lay this out. What is different than about this myth that Steve Jobs and Xerox and how this all went down?
Yeah. So the myth, if people have heard of Xerox at all, they think, oh, Xerox invented all this stuff and Steve Jobs ripped it off. And that's kind of unfair both to Apple and to Xerox. There were some people at Xerox who felt miffed that he was stealing our ideas, but a lot of us didn't. A lot of us thought, well, Xerox isn't doing it, so why shouldn't somebody else have a try?
Right. And by the way, I found this reference here from Stanford, and it's talking about, and this is obviously the setting that you have where Jobs, like you mentioned earlier in this interview already, that he discovered the mouse, Windows, icons, other technologies that were just being underutilized, he felt, by, Xerox and Park and that kind of thing. And obviously that seems to be, kind of the myth that Steve Jobs was the only one that saw value, and he was the one who made the Macintosh and spun it into something that people could use. But as you said, no, you think that a lot of your engineers, you and your colleagues, knew what you had. It's just, hey, let's have other people have a try at this. And, I guess maybe you thought like more minds was better on this kind of thing. Well,
I think Xerox felt sort of ashamed of themselves that we did, that we've been spending all these years and hundreds of people, like I think somebody I know came up with a total of 250 people that worked on Star, which sounds about right to me. So we feel like we're spending all this time and money on it. Excuse me. And Apple, which is, stereotypically a couple guys in a garage, although they were actually public by then, is how can they possibly do it? And the answer is maybe it's because there were a couple of guys in the garage and they didn't have all these millions of dollars to throw at it. The other thing that is kind of interesting about this is, to Xerox, the hobbyist or the personal user was nothing. They were totally focused on corporate users because that was their karma. And I cover in the book this one meeting I remember very, very well with our new leader in Dallas, who they realized the personal computers were coming on, and they thought, well, eventually we're going to own this corporate market. But in the meantime, we just need something to hold our place on the desktop. And that was almost a literal version of what he said. We're going to hold our place, as if the world's going to wait for Xerox to come along and do it right. So they made this personal computer, the 820, which I never even saw the thing, to be honest. I mean, so we all thought it was sort of a joke, but they thought, well, we'll just, it was kind of like these, 25-cent frozen pizzas you used to buy in the store that if you didn't know pizza, you thought, oh yeah, that's pizza. That's as good as, so they had this personal, the 820, which I don't know if you can even find those in a museum anymore.
I'm having a hard time.
Xerox didn't think that hobbyists were anything or personal users were anything. And they found out, I actually do have this in the book, that Janet's father is a financial analyst at Chrysler. Now, I don't actually know whether people did this at Chrysler, but there was definitely corporations where people in finance were bringing in their home Apple IIs to the office just because they could run VisiCalc, which was the first killer app before Lotus 1-2-3, before Excel. And it could do things in a couple seconds that would have taken them all afternoon to do the old-fashioned way. So this was just a great big shock to everyone, including to us at Xerox. And that was why they thought, well, we need to have this personal computer to hold our place on the desktop until the Star comes along. Ignoring the fact that the Star didn't even have a spreadsheet, but I cover that too. That there was a lot of embarrassment that we didn't have a spreadsheet. So there were key, and you already mentioned things like killer apps. So there were key parts that you would think that for a corporate-minded company with a research team, going that way. No offense, but you would think that spreadsheets would be pretty high up there for accountants. You would think, wouldn't you?
It's pretty great. So a lot of this was you. And sorry for interrupting there, but you think that a lot of this at Xerox was just kind of not so much mismanagement on day to day, but an overall philosophy that Xerox was developing in a way that they felt was the best moneymaker. But of course, Apple came out with something that captured everyone on kind of like a personal level.
Yeah. Xerox thought, well, the office is ours. We have these 4,000 salesmen that have direct contact with the purchasing managers in the company, and nobody else can compete with us. And if we take 3 years to do it, that's fine. The market will wait. I don't actually cover this even in the second book, but after 81, I left in May of 83. Xerox was still around and they were still trying to catch up. They built machines that had Intel processors in them so they could run PC software, and you felt kind of sad watching this because you thought, they don't understand that nobody cares anymore.
It's really hard, and I guess at that point people were expecting more and more from computers because to catch up to where other people had already innovated must be extremely difficult, especially when it's no one except these so few companies knew really what they were doing. So let's talk real quick about kind of PARC and Xerox and how that whole thing played out. I mean, you said that even when you left, they were still trying to play catch up. Did they find any kind of success with kind of with their personal computing part of their business, or was it just kind of dead after Apple in 81?
They were kind of the Walking Dead, to be honest. I have a friend who managed it all the way to the very end when they eventually moved to Palo Alto in, I think, 95 and finally shut it down. So that's 14 years of being The Walking Dead.
That's hard.
Yeah. And so Park continued to do stuff. In fact, they're still around. They're still now it's not called Xerox Park anymore. It's just called Park. And I think there's an independent company that owns it.
Mm-hmm.
So they produced some pretty interesting stuff. They had a machine called the Dorado. Everything began with a D, then the Dandelion, the Dolphin, and which was very powerful. And they had a system called Cedar, which produced a lot of great papers. Unfortunately, a lot of the Park people left, and Digital Equipment Corp, which I guess they don't exist anymore either, but
yeah,
they were kind of big. They opened 3 different labs in Palo Alto to soak up all these people, which is pretty amazing when you think about it.
Yeah.
So all the Park people went to some of the DEC labs, and the X window system, which is still pretty important, was invented there by a guy named Smokey Wallace, who this guy may be a familiar theme, but Smokey's no longer with us either.
It's
Smokey actually.
Yeah. Smokey actually what?
Smokey actually hired me at Oracle after 3Com, a couple jobs after Xerox.
Oracle,
anyway, he invented the. Go ahead.
And just real quick, he invented the
X Windows.
X Windows, gotcha.
So, you know that reference?
No, not at all. But I did want to kind of touch on the fact that this still happens in the tech industry today, which, I'm finding with a lot of my guests is that they have this kind of history. And no offense, like I'm sure that, switching from job to job, you probably saw a lot of the same faces. There's a lot of cross-pollinating. It seems like the tech community was probably pretty close-knit, back in these days. And, there were only a couple of your researchers that really knew how to, kind of push these companies forward.
Well, yeah. So I found that Xerox was really my ticket for most of my career. That, well, like I say, Smokey knew me from Xerox, and that was my 3rd job out of Xerox. My 2nd job was at 3Com, where Bob Metcalf, I didn't really know him that well, but he did hire me. And Jim White, who was my direct manager, they knew me from Xerox. My job immediately after Xerox actually didn't have any connections, which was probably a mistake on my part. But I had the credentials of knowing how to build a graphical user interface, which it was not a very common skill back then. So
right.
You could pretty much call up any VP of engineering and say, "Do you want to interview me?" And they'd all say, "Sure, come on in." Nowadays, not so much, but
well, and you'd be surprised though that there's a lot of job openings that we're finding for people who more for like government jobs and things like that behind the scenes. I'm not saying that they go all the way back to 76 or 81, but there are government openings. They're like, hey, do you know Fortran? We could definitely use your help. Some of our back end runs on Fortran, and they're like,
COBOL.
Yeah, COBOL, exactly. We need developers, and they're like, you're a couple decades, kind of late. But yeah, so there's a lot. This book seems to cover, kind of a lot, and yet in a very dense kind of time frame at the same time. We're looking at some of these other things here. We were talking about, the idea of like maze wars and things like that. Talk about real quick. I know that you already mentioned El Segundo already, but El Segundo. What actually happened there with with that and Star?
Okay, so El Segundo, for a long time, Palo Alto was where the hardware was built, and the operating system, Pilot, and the language, Mesa, and all the networking software and the development environment. And we came up here all the time on business, and I loved it. Actually, I love coming up here. And El Segundo was where the product was being built, which, if you read like histories like Dealers of Lightning, that if they even mention that word, it's like on one page. So we're building the product, and the building, which you can actually look up nowadays, I think now the address is 777 Aviation Boulevard, El Segundo, and it was just renovated. So it's one of these 60s steel and glass, 3-story ugly buildings. And the other factory buildings near there, I don't know what they did with those. Did we just get cut off here?
No. I found the property and
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Just wanted to show off, kind of the outside of the building.
Yeah.
And, renovated.
Very good. Yes. That's our building. That's where I was hired. And now it's been, I don't know who's in there now, but it's not Xerox. Oh, wow.
I think this website is just for the property and all that kind of thing. And clicking through links doesn't seem to work. But this is a website dedicated to the property itself, which obviously has historical weight. So, yep.
Yeah. So it was, we were in there, and then eventually we moved down Rosecrans to another Continental Park, it's called. And I drove by there recently, and I think it's all been redeveloped or torn down or something. So eventually, the other thing I should mention here, but by the way, is Xerox's investment in Park was totally paid for by laser printing. That was the one invention that was unqualified, a winner. Yeah, I even have in my book my other character, Grant, who was a skeptic about Star. He did I thought nobody had ever done it, namely transferring from Palo Alto to El Segundo. Like everybody went the other way. And I found out there was a guy who did that, Ron Ryder. And for the same reason, he went down to work on laser printers. So the Xerox 5700 was built on some of the same technology that we used in Star. It had the earlier rejected hardware, unfortunately for them. The hardware that we decided didn't work, and they still had to use it in the 5700. And they used Mesa, and Xerox built quite a few laser printers based on the first one was a 9700 that came out in 1977. We're just getting started. So I guess the theory that Xerox lost all these hundreds of millions of dollars is not true, that they made it all back on the printers. So the 9700 was a laser printer, and that was revolutionary. Up till then, copiers had all been optical, with a selenium drum that rotated, and the laser printer was completely different. So the 9700 came out, and it would print 2 pages a minute, which people thought nobody could ever use that much paper. But Bank of America bought 2 of them because they were using so much paper. So did I answer your question? They were still making the printers down there. Eventually the Star was sort of phased out in a long and painful decline.
Yeah, but of course that's like most other companies, even today, you just have to focus on where it is that you're actually kind of succeeding, and you have to unfortunately kind of pull the plug on systems that aren't selling as well. So perfect. And also again, just kind of plugging through these, and I should have brought it up when you actually mentioned Charles Simone by name. The fact that you're able to work with him. You said he was a very, very well. You said he was a nice guy to work with. And I have to ask personally because again, very a little bit unfamiliar, but does he have a reputation for being kind of mean or evil or any of these kinds of things?
I don't know what people at Microsoft thought about him. Actually, I think actually he was right, and the Xerox people were wrong. Is the one thing that's fatal in business is being right when everyone's wrong. So he thought that Mesa was overdone and C was the way to go. And guess right, he was right.
Yeah.
So he was sort of unpopular for defying the conventional wisdom in Palo Alto. And you have to give him credit, because when everybody's telling you you're wrong, to keep insisting that you're right takes a lot of guts. And he had it.
And there are so many personality, I guess people would consider them flaws, to make someone do that. Was he arrogant? Was he someone who, just kind of had one of those, I know better than everyone else? Or was it just simply, based on what he sees? I mean, he just kind of saw the writing on the wall before other people.
Yeah, good question. I met lots of people who are really arrogant, and sometimes it's misplaced and they have too high an opinion of themselves. I think there's another guy that's not in the book at all, Nicholas Nassim Taleb. Do you know that name at all? He wrote
no, I do not. So I can look it up. Go ahead.
He wrote The Black Swan, which I can grab off my shelf here. Anyhow, I hosted him at Google. I hosted some book talks there, and he's supremely arrogant. And if you see him on Twitter, he goes out of his way to antagonize people. It's part of his brand. But on the other hand, he made millions in trading options. He called the 1987 Black Monday crash. Mm-hmm. He made money in the housing crash of 2008. So I think he's earned the right to be arrogant. And Charles, I remember one quote I remember of him saying was, he was really big into, he called it metaprogramming. This was his PhD thesis, I think. And metaprogramming was this idea that programming should be done more like, say, building an airport, where you just hire the contractor to pour the concrete, and he gets paid whether or not the runway was in the correct place or not. And if you hire him, you're responsible for determining where the runway should go, and he just does it. And he thought that programming should be that way. You should give some senior programmer should give the programmers a metaprogram, hence the name, and they would just code it. And it never happened with me. I did the projects I did for him. He never gave me any metaprograms, and I don't think that he did Bravo that way either. But he had a lot of original ideas, and most of them, he's a billionaire now, as far as I know. He joined Microsoft in 1980. And I think if you make a bet like that and you're right, you're sort of entitled to feel you're smarter than other people, because you really are. in
your opinion, and this is the part that everyone remembers the people that guessed right, but of course the people that guessed wrong. How many of those did you when writing this book and just thinking back on the events? I'm sure that there were a lot more people who just thought the other way, or just kept the status quo, didn't make a serious bet one way or the other. I mean, that those people, I'm sure, again, aren't written about. They aren't the billionaires, but by and large, they kind of made up, I would assume, a lot of your story, right? I mean, yeah, they're these pivotal people, but there were a lot of others there that were just kind of doing their job, right?
There were a lot of people who were dead wrong, and I'd probably include myself in that, because I'm not going to say that I had the right idea all along. But there's a chapter on hardware choices. I don't remember what chapter number it is, and this one is based on a document that's on BitSavers. So there were 5 choices that were considered, and I wanted to be sure I got them right. So I got this document from 1978, I think, or 79. And they talk about all the different hardware choices. And underlying it is this idea that Mesa, which was the language they were going to use, was the key to everything. So Mesa put out a virtual instruction set, kind of like Python has P codes, or Java has the JVM.
Right.
So they had a virtual instruction set, and the idea was memory is so expensive that we first have you write the Mesa, and then we analyze it to see which instructions you use the most, and then we'll design the instruction set to be optimal. So a Mesa program will be half as big as a Fortran program or something. And that assumption dictated almost everything. They said, well, we can't use now, unfortunately, they were about 2 years ahead of, were the 2 years too early, because in 83 or so, the Motorola 68000 was capable enough to run the Macintosh or the Lisa. But at the time, when they were considering this, it was considered too puny. And part of the assumption, which I actually cover in this chapter, is, well, we would have to compile Mesa to native assembly language, native machine language on this chip, and we're not going to do that. And you think, well, why not? But like I said, no hindsight's allowed. I don't have somebody saying, with the perspective of 2021, oh, you should just compile it to native chip instructions, because at the time they thought, well, we're going to use Mesa and we're going to optimize the instruction set, and that determines our whole strategy.
Yeah.
So I sort of wanted to show this without cheating and having hindsight. We're saying, well, that was actually the wrong decision.
There's, and I'm sure that, obviously going back, I'm sure that there was the temptation when writing this book to say, put in footnotes and put in notes here saying that, this is how it actually played out. But I'm sure that when, as the story goes, you start to realize that, this may, everyone may know the end story, but do you think that the corporate offices, do you think that the people who were determining how these things were developed, do you think they made the right choice? Kind of given what in writing this book and all that kind of thing. Hindsight, we know they didn't. We know the people who won in all this, if you can call whatever this war of technology was. Do you think they made the right choice with what they had?
No, I don't. Actually, in 1998, there was they called it the Last Star retrospective, which it wasn't, but at Park, they had a star up there, and Dave Smith, whose son you see on the cover there, was talking, and Dave Liddell, that's Liddle, if you want to look that up, he was in charge of all of these efforts, and I asked him in front of the crowd, with benefit of hindsight, do you wish we had sold the Alto? So here, I wasn't asking, knowing only what you knew at the time, was that the right decision? I was asking, knowing what you know now, was that the right decision? Yeah, there's Dave.
Yeah.
And
co-founder
he said,
IRC. Yep.
Yeah. And he said, with benefit of hindsight, yes, I do wish we had sold the Alto. So I actually don't cover this enough in the book, but Xerox had a choice that they could have been like a holding company, that they could have started up this California computer company and given it money and then stepped back and, folded their arms and said, well, we're selling copiers here and you guys are selling computers out there. And they could have sold the machine you see on. It would have cost a fortune. It would have cost $30,000 in dollars. I don't know, maybe 50,000.
Right.
But there were people that would have bought it because it did things that you couldn't get at any price. And the advantage of doing that is then you start to get some real life feel for what the market is like. You do a test market, and it's a niche product, sure, but eventually you make the niche bigger, and that's one business strategy. And Xerox thought of that at the time. And what I've heard, I never heard anybody say this directly, was they said, we don't want to be a holding company. We don't want to be a company that just and you think now, well, why the hell not?
Right. Yeah. And definitely. And by the way, we have a listener that actually has a question here that I'm going to turn it just a little bit because I think it's pretty, kind of stereotypical, remove one person from history, so on and so forth. But I do think it would be a very interesting kind of idea that obviously you wrote the book, you tried to stay as true to and we might actually have to turn off the video because it looks like we're, kind of getting some internet connection issues, so we can do this. And if you could just turn off your video, make sure we have the bandwidth for audio at least. Okay. I want to say that this question of if you could have removed someone from this story, to either let's keep it to make it better, to make Xerox either succeed or, kind of change the course of events. Is there someone that you think that if you remove them from the story, it would have made Xerox's, I guess, kind of fall from personal computing a little bit less precipitous or change? Like, do you think there's someone that Xerox could have done better with that? And that's kind of mean, but, hey, there were key players there.
I actually never thought of that question. Without Dave Liddell, we never would have even gotten as far as we did.
Right.
But he
and the music means that we're running short on time, so I probably should have asked that so close to the end of the show because I'll be honest, and everyone, we've been talking to Mr. Albert Cory. He is, of course, the author of the book here, Inventing the Future. If you want to find out more, we'll have a link to this in the show notes, computeramerica.com. And actually, if you would not mind staying just a bit, we'll kind of wrap up the music here and that whole thing. But I wanted to talk to you just a little bit more, and it'll be available on the podcast that everyone can go out and check out after the program. But once again, everyone, Inventing the Future, Albert Cory, and it's all about, hey, the true backstory of Xerox and what happened with PARC and personal computing, Apple, and hey, there's it's a little bit of fiction, but a lot of bit of fact, and it's certainly a very intriguing time for the personal computing world. So everyone, will stay with us here on the podcast, and thank you so much, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll go ahead and cut that off right there. So, we are still live here with the podcast, so the radio audience is kind of left, but I wanted to let you go ahead and finish your thought there about not okay, so not Dave Liddell, but would Xerox have done a little bit better in this space without someone in your story?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's clearly not Dave Liddell because we never would have even gotten as far as we did.
Right.
He handled all the, in the book I had this character Grant Avery who at first starts out managing the operating system. And there actually was a guy who filled that role for a while, but Grant's not based on him. Mm-hmm. But if I'm wandering, wave your hands and
you're good.
I'll come back to the story. So Grant eventually gives up this job of managing the operating system and is in charge of interfacing with the corporate managers back in Rochester and Stamford. Mm-hmm. And those people were kind of a black box to us. But unlike a lot of companies where you sort of know what the big executives were thinking, I had no idea. I know that they cared mainly about their profits because the copier sales were getting eaten up. And there was a guy, Archie McCardle.
Archie McCardle, okay.
I think that's Archie something. You can tell how into this stuff I was. So I actually never went to Rochester and I never went to Stamford, although some people I knew did. So I didn't have any contact with these people, and I don't know whether any one of them was the cause of Xerox's failure. I would look at it more as not somebody I could remove, but somebody I could add. Mm-hmm. That if there were someone in charge who said, look, we are going to be a holding company. We don't know computers. We know copiers. We know printers. And we're going to give these guys money and tell them that if they go broke, then they go broke and we're not going to save them, and let them figure it out for themselves. And that would have been a winning move, I think. But I don't think there's any...
It seems like a little bit more autonomy for your group. It seems like what you were really hoping for.
Well, for a long, long time, Dave Liddell was telling us that all these 4,000 Xerox salesmen were going to start selling stars. And I don't know whether any of us laughed at that idea, but it seems ludicrous now because these were people who, when they sold a copier, it had a meter on it. Mm-hmm. And every month they would show up and read your meter and give you a bill for how many copies you made. It's hard to believe now, but that's how that's how the copier business worked then. Yeah. So that was their mindset, and it worked for them. But selling stars was a little bit different. So eventually I think David convinced them to let him have a sales force of 120 people, I think, instead of 4,000. Mm-hmm. And those were the ones who sold the Star. And ever since then, whenever a top executive says, well, we're transitioning our sales force, I think we'll run for the hills. Things are going to go south real fast.
And I'm assuming that it was quite difficult, to kind of push the Star system when you had, like you mentioned, accountants bringing their own Apple IIs into work. I'm sure that there were some key, capability differences that the salesman kind of had to work around. That, yeah.
Well, I mean, IBM had the name in computers, and somehow, they used to say nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, which really meant the mainframe days, but they came out with a personal computer, and it was, it was okay. It wasn't a Macintosh, but it was good enough. I used one, and that's who Xerox was competing with. And it was really like no competition. But you say, well, I've got this Xerox Star and the complete system costs you $100,000.
Yeah.
You say, well, I can go to Businessland and buy a PC for $3,000. So thank you. Have a nice day.
It's certainly crazy. So, and obviously, there's a lot more nuances to your story. And I'll be honest, we never really, kind of do this, Bob, that going after kind of show hours and, the radio show, I'm hoping that they're checking this out. But I want to thank you so much for kind of staying late and kind of outlining this for us. And I wanted to, since we have open time here and, no cutoffs, is there any part of the story or anything that you wanted to mention that we didn't get a chance to touch on? Or, do you think you gave us a pretty good outline of inventing the future?
You gave a pretty good outline. I think you asked a lot of great questions here. The one about who would you get rid of? I think, wow, I never thought of that one. It's more who would I add rather than who would I get rid of.
Thank the listener for that one. They asked very insightful questions, and I do think that one was kind of a little bit of that stereotypical, if you could do it to anyone in history, not just this, but hey, we're talking about a specific time in history. That would be, certainly something to think of. But your story was not about removing people you didn't deserve to be there or anything like that. It was just more about fleshing out some of the decisions with some personal involvement with it. So makes perfect sense.
One of the things that I say this in the preface, actually, that I'm not the sort of, I don't know if you remember the show Parks and Rec, where there was the guy Jerry who, in the last show, they said he became the mayor of Pawnee.
Everyone hated, but he had the perfect family. He was the perfect guy, and yeah, he became mayor. Yeah.
And I'm not like Jerry. But I found that the people at Xerox, I genuinely liked most of them. That they were fantastic people, and not just technically, but we could talk about music or politics or right. art or travel or anything like that. And most of the famous people, I'm sorry I never met Alan Kay, who, believe it or not, he is still around. I've never met him, but he's around. I never met him. I probably met Larry Tesler once or twice. I don't recall, but most of them are terrific people. And if you wanted to have Dave Smith on,
absolutely,
I'll let him know. And now he's retired and living in Bend, Oregon. But I took piano lessons from his wife for 12 years. So I used to see him every Thursday.
Very cool. Yeah, and we'll talk about that in if you want to stay around for just a minute. We're going to wrap up the show here, and then we can talk just a little bit more. But everyone, we have been talking to, of course, Mr. Albert Cory, author of Inventing the Future, available through Amazon. Of course, published there. You can buy the Kindle version, paperback. You can buy it all there, and then of course you can pre-order it. I believe publication date, it says August 10th, 2021. That's when it should be ready to purchase.
That's when the Kindle will be appear in your inbox. I should mention that Albert Cory is not my given name. Right. My real name is Bob Purvey.
Bob Purvey, right?
The name, you got to admit, sounds kind of like pervert. Which
I wanted to be kind of careful what I said here on the air, but if you're going to say it, so Bob Purvey, of course, has been our guest, and of course your nom de plume, or your pen name is Cory. I just wanted to be careful because we didn't get the chance to kind of talk before the show to kind of double check which name you wanted. So, but hey, if you're comfortable, I'm comfortable.
I appreciate it. If you're looking for my internet history, then Bob Purvey is what you want.
Right there, you go.
My niece, she hated the name her whole life, and so she couldn't wait to get married and get rid of it. And she's now Lisa Cory. I thought, well, that's a good name. I'll use that. So
there you go. No, hey, that's perfect. So and there you go, everyone. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Again, computeramerica.com. We'll have a link to it directly there, and it'll be in all the show notes. And hey, we'll work on getting this up. So everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for joining us kind of after the program, but still, if you're listening to the podcast, thank you so much. And everyone, have a great one. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks a lot.